The door creaked open, and my heart stopped. Moonlight sliced through the blinds, casting jagged shadows across my tiny Brooklyn apartment. And there he was, a stranger, shirtless, standing in the middle of my room. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, as his eyes, wide and desperate, locked onto mine. My name is Eli Carter, 22, a barista by day and a dreamer by night, scraping by in a city that chews up hope like cheap coffee grounds. I'd always thought my life was predictable: work, sleep, repeat, until that night in June when everything changed. The stranger, who I'd later learn was named Lucas, didn't move. He just stood there, his bare chest rising and falling, his hands trembling like he was carrying a secret too heavy to hold. "Who the hell are you?" I whispered, my voice sharper than I meant. I clutched the edge of my bed, ready to bolt, but something in his expression stopped me. It wasn't menacing, it was fear, raw and unguarded, like he was running from something bigger than both of us. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low, cracking at the edges. I didn't know where else to go. He took a step forward, and I noticed the bruise blooming across his ribs, purple and angry under the moonlight. My instincts screamed to call the cops, but my heart, that stupid, reckless thing, told me to listen. Lucas was 21, a runaway from a small town in Ohio, with a story he wasn't ready to tell. He'd climbed the fire escape, slipped through my window, and now stood half naked in my room because, as he later whispered, "I saw your pride flag from the street." It felt safe. I didn't know then that his arrival would unravel my carefully guarded world, exposing truths I'd buried deep about love, identity, and the courage to be seen. That night, as the city hummed outside, I made a choice. I handed him a spare t-shirt from my drawer, my fingers brushing his as he took it. "You can stay," I said, my voice barely audible, "but you're telling me everything in the morning." He nodded, his eyes glistening with something between relief and shame. I didn't sleep that night, not with a stranger on my couch, his shallow breaths echoing in the dark. I didn't know it yet, but Lucas wasn't just a stranger, was the spark that would set my life ablaze. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the window, harsh and unforgiving. Lucas sat on my couch, clutching a mug of coffee like it was a lifeline. His blonde hair stuck up in odd angles, and the bruise on his side looked worse in the daylight. I sat across from him, my knees pulled to my chest, trying to make sense of the stranger who'd invaded my space. "I'm not a creep," he started, his voice soft but steady. "I swear. I couldn't go back." He told me about his hometown, a place where being gay was a sin whispered about in church pews. His parents had found out about him 2 weeks ago, and the fallout was brutal: shouting, threats, a fist that left that bruise. He'd fled with nothing but the clothes on his back, hitchhiking to New York, chasing a city he thought might let him breathe. I listened, my chest tightening with every word. I'd grown up in a liberal bubble, my parents waving pride flags at every parade, but I'd never come out to them or anyone. I'd spent years dodging questions about girlfriends, hiding behind vague smiles and "I'm too busy" excuses. Lucas's story hit me like a punch, stirring up guilt I didn't know I carried. Here was someone who'd lost everything for being himself, while I hid in plain sight, too scared to claim my truth. "Why my place?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant. He looked at the pride flag pinned above my desk, its colors faded from years of neglect. "It was the only light on," he said. "And that flag, it felt like a sign." I wanted to laugh it off, to call it coincidence, but the weight in his eyes stopped me. Maybe it was a sign for him, for me, for both of us. That day, I let him stay. I told myself it was temporary, just until he figured things out. But as the hours turned into days, Lucas became more than a stranger. He was funny, in a dry, sarcastic way that caught me off guard. He'd hum old punk songs while washing dishes, his voice surprisingly soft. He'd talk about books he loved, his hands animated, his eyes bright with a passion I envied. I found myself watching him, noticing the way his lips curved when he smiled, the way his fingers fidgeted when he was nervous. I told myself it was nothing, just curiosity, but my heart was louder than my lies. By the third day, we'd settled into a fragile routine. I'd go to work at the coffee shop, leaving Lucas with my spare key and a list of chores to keep him busy. He'd clean, cook terrible pasta, and leave notes on my fridge, little doodles of stars or stupid jokes that made me laugh despite myself. I started looking forward to coming home, to finding him sprawled on my couch with a book, his bare feet tucked under him. It was dangerous, this pull I felt, but I couldn't stop it. One night, after a long shift, I came home to find him sitting on the fire escape, staring at the city lights. The air was thick with summer heat, and his t-shirt clung to his skin. I sat beside him, our shoulders brushing, and for the first time, I didn't pull away. "You ever think about starting over?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "All the time," I admitted, surprising myself. I told him about my dreams, writing music, playing gigs, living a life that felt like mine. I didn't tell him the rest, that I'd spent years hiding who I was, afraid of what it might cost me. But sitting there, with the city sprawling below us, I felt the truth clawing its way out. Lucas turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "You don't have to hide. You know," he said, like he could see right through me. My breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought he might lean closer. Instead, he stood, offering me his hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's go inside. It's getting cold." I took his hand, my skin buzzing where we touched. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrifying. I didn't want him to leave. Not tomorrow. Not ever. And that scared me more than any stranger ever could. The days blurred into a week, and Lucas became a fixture in my life, like a song stuck in my head. My apartment, once a quiet refuge, now hummed with his presence, his laugh, his off-key singing, the way he'd leave coffee mugs on every surface. But with every moment we spent together, the tension in my chest grew, a tangle of fear and longing I couldn't name. I started noticing things about him I shouldn't have. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed at my terrible puns. The way he'd bite his lip when he was deep in thought, reading one of my old novels. I caught myself staring too long, my heart racing when he'd catch my gaze and smile. I told myself it was nothing, just the closeness of sharing a small space. But I wasn't fooling anyone, least of all myself. One afternoon, I came home early from the coffee shop, my boss letting me off because of a slow day. Lucas was on the couch, sketching in a notebook he'd found in my desk. He didn't hear me come in, and for a moment, I just watched him. His pencil moved with purpose, sketching a city skyline that looked like it was burning. There was something raw in the lines, something that mirrored the bruise still fading on his side. "What's that?" I asked, leaning over his shoulder. He jumped, slamming the notebook shut, his cheeks flushing. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "Just messing around." I raised an eyebrow, sitting beside him. "Didn't look like nothing." "You're good. You know." I reached for the notebook, half teasing, but he pulled it away, his expression shifting to something guarded. "It's private," he said, his voice sharp. I backed off, raising my hands in surrender, but the moment stung. I'd thought we were past secrets, but Lucas was still a locked door, letting me in only when he chose. That night, we went to a diner down the street, a greasy hole in the wall with flickering neon signs. Lucas picked at his fries, quieter than usual. I tried to lighten the mood, joking about the barista life, but he barely smiled. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "What's going on with you?" I asked, leaning across the table. He looked at me, his eyes heavy with something unspoken. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Being here, with you. It feels too good. Like I'm waiting for it to fall apart." My stomach twisted. I wanted to tell him it wouldn't, that he could stay as long as he needed, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I reached for his hand, my fingers brushing his knuckles. "You're not alone anymore," I said, my voice barely steady. "Okay." He nodded, but his eyes were wet, and he pulled his hand away to wipe them. I wanted to reach for him again, to close the distance between us, but the weight of my own fears held me back. I wasn't ready to admit what I felt, not to him, not to myself. The next day, I found the notebook on the coffee table, open to a new sketch. It was me, sitting on the fire escape, my guitar in my lap. The details were stunning: the curve of my jaw, the way my hair fell into my eyes. Underneath, in small, careful letters, he'd written, "Eli, who sees me?" My heart pounded as I traced the words, a mix of awe and terror washing over me. He'd seen me, too, in ways I hadn't meant to show. I didn't bring it up, but the sketch changed something. I started opening up, telling him things I'd never told anyone about: the songs I wrote in secret, about the fear that kept me from performing them. He listened, his eyes steady, and for the first time, I felt like someone truly saw me, not just the version I showed the world. One night, we stayed up late, sharing a bottle of cheap wine I'd swiped from work. The room was warm, the city quiet outside, and Lucas was closer than usual, his knee brushing mine on the couch. "You ever been in love?" he asked, his voice soft, almost afraid. I froze, the question cutting too close. "I don't know," I said, staring at my glass. "Maybe I'm too scared to find out." It was the closest I'd come to admitting the truth, and my pulse raced as I waited for his response. He looked at me, his eyes searching, and for a moment, I thought he might say something that would change everything. But then he smiled, a sad, fleeting thing, and changed the subject. "Tell me about your music," he said, and I let him steer us away from the edge. But the edge was closer than I thought. The next morning, I woke to find a note on the fridge, gone to clear my head. "Back soon. L." My stomach dropped. I told myself he'd be back, that he just needed space, but the apartment felt emptier without him. I spent the day pacing, checking my phone, jumping at every noise outside. When night fell and he still wasn't back, panic set in. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, searching the streets, the diner, the park where we'd walked a few nights ago. The city felt too big, too cold, swallowing him whole. I was about to give up when I saw him, sitting on a bench by the East River, his shoulders hunched, his face buried in his hands. "Lucas," I called, running to him. He looked up, his eyes red, and for a moment, I thought he might run again. But he didn't. He stood, and before I could stop myself, I pulled him into a hug, my arms tight around him. "Don't do that again," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You scared the hell out of me." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice muffled against my shoulder. I don't know how to stay." I held him tighter, my heart pounding, and in that moment, I knew I was in deeper than I'd ever meant to go. Holding Lucas by the river, I felt the world shift. His breath was warm against my neck, his body trembling under my hands. And for the first time, I didn't pull away from the truth. I was falling for him, hard and fast, and it terrified me. We walked back to the apartment in silence, the city's pulse matching my own. Lucas didn't explain where he'd gone, and I didn't ask. Some things didn't need words, not yet. But when we got home, he paused at the door, his hand lingering on the frame. "Thanks for coming after me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and we stepped inside, the air between us charged with something new. The next few days were different. Lucas was quieter, but he stayed closer, his presence a constant hum in my chest. We'd cook together, bumping shoulders in my tiny kitchen, or sit on the fire escape, sharing stories about our lives before we met. He told me about his childhood bike rides through cornfields, sneaking into abandoned barns, the ache of knowing he didn't fit in. I told him about my parents, how they'd always supported me but never knew the real me, the part I'd kept locked away. One evening, I pulled out my guitar, something I hadn't done in front of anyone in years. Lucas watched, his eyes bright with curiosity, as I strummed a melody I'd been working on. It was rough, unfinished, but it felt like mine. "Play it again," he said when I finished, his voice soft but insistent. I did, and he leaned closer, his shoulder against mine, his breath steady as he listened. When I stopped, he didn't say anything, just looked at me with an intensity that made my skin burn. "You're good, Eli," he said finally. "You should share that with the world." I laughed, brushing it off, but his words stuck. For the first time, I wondered if I could be brave not just for him, but for myself. That night, we stayed up talking until the sky turned gray. Lucas told me about the first boy he'd loved, a high school friend who'd kissed him in secret and then pretended it never happened. The betrayal had cut deep, leaving scars I could hear in his voice. I wanted to tell him I'd never hurt him like that, but the words felt too big, too risky. Instead, I reached for his hand, lacing our fingers together. He didn't pull away. The next morning, I woke to find him sketching again, this time a portrait of us on the fire escape, our shoulders touching, the city sprawling behind us. The details were so vivid, the curve of my smile, the way his hair caught the light that I felt exposed, like he'd seen parts of me I hadn't meant to show. "You're too good at this," I said, trying to keep my voice light. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's how I make sense of things," he said, drawing what I feel. I wanted to ask what he felt, what we were to him, but fear held me back. Instead, I suggested we go out, do something normal to shake off the weight between us. We ended up at a small open mic night in a dive bar in the East Village. The place was packed, the air thick with smoke and laughter. I hadn't planned to perform, but Lucas nudged me, his eyes daring me to try. "Show them who you are," he whispered, and something in his voice pushed me forward. I signed up, my hands shaking as I climbed onto the stage, guitar in hand. The lights were blinding, the crowd a blur, but I saw Lucas in the front, his gaze steady. I played my song, the one I'd shown him, and poured everything into it, my fears, my hopes, the way he made me feel. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, but all I cared about was his smile, wide and proud, lighting up the dark. Afterward, we walked home, the city alive around us. Lucas was quiet, but his hand brushed mine, and I took the risk, lacing our fingers together. He didn't pull away, and for the first time, I let myself hope that this whatever it was could be real. But hope is a fragile thing. The next day, I came home to find a letter on the counter. Lucas's handwriting neat and deliberate. Eli, I need to figure some things out. I'll be back. I promise. L. My heart sank. He'd left again, and this time, I didn't know where to find him. I searched the apartment for clues, finding only his sketchbook, open to a new drawing a single figure, alone, staring at a city that felt too big. Underneath, he'd written, "I'm sorry I'm not brave enough yet." I sat on the couch, the sketchbook in my lap, and felt the weight of his absence. I'd let him in, let myself feel, and now he was gone. But even as fear clawed at me, I knew one thing: I wasn't giving up. Not on him, not on us. I grabbed my phone and texted him. A simple message: "Come back when you're ready. I'll be here." Then I waited, hoping he'd find his way back to me. The apartment felt like a ghost town without Lucas. His absence lingered in the empty coffee mugs, the untouched sketchbook, the quiet that pressed against my chest. I kept his note on the counter, reading it over and over, searching for meaning in the spaces between his words. Days turned into a week, and I threw myself into work, hoping the grind of steaming milk and wiping counters would dull the ache. But every night, I came home to the same silence, checking my phone for a reply that never came. I told myself he'd be back, that he just needed time, but doubt crept in like a thief, stealing the hope I'd clung to. One night, unable to sleep, I picked up my guitar and started writing. The chords came fast, raw, spilling out everything I couldn't say: fear, longing, the way Lucas had cracked open my world. The song was messy, but it was honest, and for the first time, I didn't care if it was perfect. It was mine, and it was for him. I started performing more, dragging myself to open mic nights, each song a quiet plea for Lucas to hear me, wherever he was. The crowds were small, but their applause filled a void I hadn't realized was there. I was coming out of my shell, not just as a musician, but as myself, the self I'd hidden for so long. I started talking about my identity at work, dropping casual mentions of being gay, testing the waters. My coworkers were kind, some even proud, and I realized the world hadn't ended. Lucas had been right, I didn't have to hide. One afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. My heart leapt, hoping it was him, but it was a woman named Sarah, a friend of Lucas's from Ohio. She'd found my number in his things, left behind in a hurry. "He's in trouble," she said, her voice tight. "He's been staying at a shelter in Queens, but he's not doing well. He talks about you, Eli. He needs you." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my jacket and headed to the address she gave me, a rundown building with peeling paint and a flickering sign. The shelter was crowded, the air thick with desperation, but I found Lucas in a corner, his head bowed, his sketchbook clutched to his chest. He looked thinner, his eyes hollow, and my heart broke at the sight. "Lucas," I said, kneeling in front of him. He looked up, startled, and for a moment, I thought he might bolt. But then his face crumpled, and he leaned into me, his arms wrapping around my shoulders. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice raw. "I didn't know how to come back." I held him, the noise of the shelter fading away. "You're here now?" I said. "That's what matters." I helped him gather his things, and we left, the city stretching out before us like a second chance. Back at the apartment, Lucas told me everything. He'd left because he was scared of what he felt for me, scared of dragging me into his mess. He'd been trying to find a job, a place to stay, anything to prove he could stand on his own. But the city was brutal, and he'd ended up at the shelter, too ashamed to come back until he had something to show for it. "You don't have to prove anything," I said, my voice fierce. Not to me. I took his hand, my thumb brushing over his knuckles, and he didn't pull away. For the first time, I felt like we were on the same page. Both of us raw and open. No walls between us. That night, we sat on the couch, closer than ever, the air thick with possibility. I told him about my music, about the songs I'd written for him, and he listened, his eyes soft. When I finished, he leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. I don't deserve you, he whispered, but I shook my head, closing the distance between us. Our first kiss was tentative, a question more than a statement, but it felt like coming home. His lips were soft, his hands trembling as they cupped my face, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. We pulled back, breathless, and he smiled, a real smile that lit up the room. The days that followed were a blur of new beginnings. Lucas started looking for work, his confidence slowly returning. I helped him with his resume, teasing him about his terrible handwriting, and he laughed, the sound brighter than before. We fell into a rhythm, not just as roommates, but as something more, something neither of us was ready to name, but both of us felt. One evening, Lucas showed me a new sketch drawing of us, hand in hand, the city skyline behind us. This is what I want, he said, his voice steady. You, me, a future. I looked at the drawing, my heart full, and knew I wanted it too. But the past has a way of catching up. One morning, I found Lucas staring at his phone, his face pale. It's my dad, he said, his voice shaking. He's in New York. He's looking for me. The air in the apartment turned heavy the moment Lucas said his dad was coming. His hands shook as he showed me the text. I know you're in New York. We need to talk. Tell me where you are. The words were cold, clinical, but they carried a threat that made my skin crawl. Lucas paced the small living room, his sketchbook abandoned on the couch. He can't find me, he said, his voice tight with panic. He'll drag me back to Ohio. Eli. He'll make me be someone I'm not. I saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear he'd carried the night he climbed through my window, and I knew I had to protect him. We'll figure this out, I said, pulling him into a hug. His body was tense, but he leaned into me, his breath uneven. He doesn't know where you are. You're safe here. But even as I said it, I felt the weight of uncertainty. Lucas's dad wasn't just a ghost from his pa that was a real threat, one that could shatter the fragile life we were building. I suggested we lay low, stay away from places where his dad might look. Lucas agreed, but his anxiety was palpable, his eyes darting to the window every time a car passed. I tried to keep things normal, cooking dinner, playing music, but the tension hung over us like a storm cloud. That night, we sat on the fire escape, the city lights a distant comfort. Lucas was quiet, his knees pulled to his chest, his fingers tracing the scars of his past. The bruise had faded, but others, less visible, remained. I thought I'd escaped him, he said finally. But he's always there, in my head, telling me I'm wrong, that I'm broken. You're not broken, I said, my voice fierce. You're the bravest person I know. I reached for his hand, and he let me hold it, his grip tight. We'll face this together. Okay. Whatever happens. He nodded, but his eyes were distant, lost in memories I couldn't touch. I wanted to fix it, to take away his pain, but all I could do was be there, steady and present, as he fought his demons. The next day, I convinced Lucas to come with me to an open mic night, hoping it would distract him. He was hesitant, but he agreed, clutching his sketchbook like a shield. The bar was crowded, the air warm with bodies and anticipation, and I felt a spark of hope as I took the stage. I played a new song, one I'd written about finding light in the dark, about choosing love over fear. Lucas watched from the crowd, his eyes locked on me, and for a moment, everything felt right. But when I stepped off the stage, I saw him tense, his gaze fixed on the door. A man stood there, older, broad-shouldered, with a face that mirrored Lucas's but hardened by years of anger. My stomach dropped. It was his dad. "Lucas," the man called, his voice cutting through the noise. The room seemed to shrink, every eye turning to us. Lucas froze, his breath shallow, and I stepped in front of him, my heart pounding. "You need to leave," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The man's eyes narrowed, sizing me up, and I saw the same cruelty Lucas had described, the kind that left bruises deeper than skin. "This is family business," he said, stepping closer. "Get out of my way." "No," I said, standing my ground. "He's not going anywhere with you." The words felt like a line in the sand, one I wasn't sure I was ready to cross, but I did it for Lucas. For us. The crowd was watching now, the air thick with tension. Lucas grabbed my arm, his voice low. "Eli, don't. He's not worth it." But I could feel his fear, his need for someone to fight for him, and I wasn't backing down. The man lunged, grabbing Lucas's wrist, and everything happened fast. I pushed between them, my hands on his chest, shoving him back. "Let him go," I shouted, my voice raw. The bartender stepped in, threatening to call the cops, and the man backed off, his eyes burning with rage. "You're making a mistake, Lucas," he said, his voice cold. "You'll regret this." Then he turned and left, the door slamming behind him. Lucas was shaking, his face pale, and I pulled him outside, away from the staring eyes. We sat on the curb, the city humming around us, and he buried his face in his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't want you to see that." "I'm glad I did," I said, my hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to face him alone anymore." He looked at me, his eyes wet, and leaned into me, his body heavy with relief and fear. That night, back at the apartment, we didn't talk about his dad. Instead, we held each other, the silence saying more than words could. I kissed him, soft and slow, and he kissed me back, his hands steady for the first time in days. It wasn't a solution, but it was a promise to fight for each other, no matter what came next. The encounter with Lucas's dad left a shadow over us, but it also brought us closer. We were a team now, bound by something stronger than fear. Lucas started opening up more, sharing pieces of himself he'd kept hidden, his dreams of being an artist, his love for the way cities told stories in their lines and shadows. I listened, falling deeper with every word, every glance. I kept performing, my music becoming a lifeline for both of us. Lucas came to every show, his sketchbook always in hand, capturing moments I didn't even know he saw him on stage. The crowd, the way the lights hit my guitar. His drawings were a mirror, showing me a version of myself I was starting to believe in. One night, after a show, we walked through Central Park, the air cool and crisp. Lucas was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. We stopped by a fountain, the water catching the moonlight, and he turned to me, his eyes serious. "I want to stay," he said. "Not just in New York, but with you. If you'll have me." My heart leapt, but fear crept in too. "What about your dad?" I asked. "What if he comes back?" Lucas took a deep breath, his hand finding mine. He doesn't get to decide who I am anymore. You've shown me that. His words hit me like a wave, washing away the doubts I'd carried. I pulled him close, kissing him under the stars, the city fading around us. It was a promise, a vow to build something real, no matter the cost. The next week, Lucas got a job at an art supply store. A small step, but a victory. He came home beaming, his hands stained with paint from a demo he'd done for a customer. I teased him about it, but I was proud of his resilience, his courage to start over. We celebrated with takeout and bad TV, laughing until our sides hurt. And I realized this was what I'd always wanted, a life that felt like home. But the past wasn't done with us. One morning, I found an envelope slipped under the door, addressed to Lucas in sharp, angry handwriting. Inside was a letter from his dad, demanding he come home, threatening to cut him off for good if he didn't. Lucas read it in silence, his face unreadable, then tore it up, letting the pieces fall to the floor. "I'm done with him," he said, his voice steady but laced with pain. "I choose you, Eli. I choose us." I hugged him, my heart swelling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his dad wouldn't let go so easily. We decided to take a stand. Lucas wanted to face his dad, to tell him he was done hiding, and I agreed to go with him. We tracked him down to a motel on the edge of the city, a grim place that reeked of cigarette smoke and regret. Lucas's dad was waiting, his face a mask of disdain as we walked in. "You think you can just walk away?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're my son. You don't get to choose." "Yes, I do," Lucas said, his voice shaking but firm. "I'm not your version of me. I'm gay, and I'm happy, and I'm not going back." I stood beside him, my hand on his back, ready to step in if things turned ugly. His dad's face twisted, but he didn't move. "You'll regret this," he said, echoing the words from the bar. But Lucas didn't flinch. He turned and walked out, and I followed, my heart pounding with pride and fear. Back at the apartment, Lucas was quiet, processing what he'd done. I sat beside him, our hands intertwined, and let him take his time. "I feel free," he said finally, his voice soft. "For the first time, I feel like I can breathe." I kissed him, my lips lingering on his, and knew we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. That night, we made love for the first time, slow and careful, every touch a promise. It wasn't just physical, it was a claiming of each other, a defiance of everything that had tried to tear us apart. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, the city quiet outside, and I knew I'd never let him go. Life with Lucas settled into something beautiful, like a song finally finding its rhythm. We were a couple now, no longer hiding from each other or ourselves. My apartment, once a place to hide, became a home, filled with his sketches, our laughter, the music we made together. But the shadow of his dad lingered, a quiet threat we couldn't ignore. I started booking more gigs, my confidence growing with every performance. Lucas was my biggest supporter, sketching me on stage, his drawings capturing the fire I felt when I played. He was finding his place too, taking art classes at a community center, his talent shining brighter with every stroke. We were building a life, piece by piece, and it felt like a miracle. One evening, we went to a pride event in the village, the streets alive with color and music. Lucas held my hand, his grip tight, and I saw the awe in his eyes, the realization that he belonged, that we both did. We danced under the lights, our bodies close, and for the first time, I felt truly free. I kissed him in the middle of the crowd, not caring who saw, and he laughed, his joy infectious. But the past came crashing back a week later. I came home to find the apartment trashed, books scattered, the pride flag torn from the wall, my guitar case dented. Lucas was on the couch, his face pale, a new bruise on his cheek. "He found me," he said, his voice hollow. "He came here while you were at work." Rage boiled in my chest, but I pushed it down, kneeling in front of him. "Are you okay?" I asked, my hands gentle as I touched his face. He nodded, but his eyes were haunted, and I knew this wasn't over. We called the police, filed a report, but they said there wasn't much they could do without evidence. Lucas's dad was gone, a ghost again, but his presence lingered in the broken things, the fear in Lucas's eyes. I wanted to hunt him down, to make him pay, but Lucas stopped me. "He's not worth it," he said. "I just want to move forward." So we did. We cleaned the apartment, patched the flag, fixed what we could. Lucas threw himself into his art, creating a series of sketches about his journey, pain, fear, but also love and hope. I wrote songs about us, about fighting for what mattered, and we started planning a joint project, a show combining my music and his art, a celebration of who we were. The planning kept us busy, but the fear was always there, a shadow we couldn't shake. One night, Lucas woke up screaming, his nightmares pulling him back to Ohio, to his dad's anger. I held him, whispering that he was safe, that I'd never let anything happen to him. But I knew words weren't enough. We needed to take back our power. We decided to confront his dad one last time, not in anger, but in strength. Lucas wrote him a letter, pouring out everything: his pain, his freedom, his love for me. He didn't expect a response, but it was his way of closing the door. We mailed it, and Lucas seemed lighter, like he'd let go of something heavy. The night of our show arrived, a small gallery in Brooklyn packed with friends and strangers. I played my songs, each one a piece of our story, while Lucas's sketches hung on the walls, vivid and raw. The crowd was small but warm, their applause filling us with hope. Lucas stood beside me, his hand in mine, and I knew we'd made something real, something that couldn't be broken. After the show, a woman approached us, her eyes kind. She was a curator, interested in Lucas's work, offering him a chance to exhibit in a bigger gallery. It was a dream neither of us had dared to hope for, and we celebrated that night, our laughter louder than the city. The success of our show marked a turning point. Lucas's art was gaining attention, and my music was finding an audience. We were no longer just surviving, we're thriving, building a life that felt like ours. But the past wasn't done with us. Not yet. One morning, Lucas got a call from Sarah, his friend from Ohio. His dad was sick, in the hospital, and had asked for him. Lucas's face went pale, his hands shaking as he hung up. "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice small. "He's still my dad, but I can't go back to that." I sat beside him, my hand on his knee. "You don't have to go," I said. "But if you want to, I'll go with you. You don't have to face him alone." He looked at me, his eyes searching, and nodded. We booked tickets to Ohio, the decision heavy but necessary. The hospital was sterile, the air thick with antiseptic and regret. Lucas's dad lay in a bed, thinner than I remembered, his face gaunt. He looked at Lucas, his eyes flickering with something: remorse, maybe, or just exhaustion. "I didn't want it to be like this," he said, his voice weak. Lucas stood tall, his hand in mine. "I know," he said, "but I'm not who you wanted me to be. I'm happy, Dad. I'm in love, and I'm free." The words were steady, a final stand, and I squeezed his hand, proud beyond words. His dad didn't respond, just closed his eyes, And we left, the weight of the moment lingering. On the flight home, Lucas was quiet, but he leaned into me, his head on my shoulder. "I think I'm finally done," he said. "With him, with the past." I kissed his forehead, knowing he'd carry the scars, but not the burden. Back in New York, we threw ourselves into our dreams. Lucas's art was featured in a gallery, his sketches telling stories of resilience and love. I recorded my songs, a small label taking interest, and we started planning a future, maybe a bigger apartment, maybe a life beyond the city. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other, and that was enough. One night, we sat on the fire escape, the city sprawling below us, the pride flag pinned back above my desk. Lucas handed me a new sketch, a drawing of us, older, laughing, our hands still intertwined. "This is us," he said, his voice soft. "In 10 years. 20. Together." I looked at the drawing, my heart full, and pulled him close. "Together," I said, and we kissed. The city lights our witness. The stranger who'd entered my room that night was no longer a stranger, was my home, my future, my truth. Our story wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We'd faced fear, fought for love, and found a place where we could be ourselves. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all, living unapologetically, side by side, in a world that tried to tear us apart but only made us stronger.